In 30 years, I will make sure there's no more fossil fuels.
In 30 years, I want to be a mentor to those who have been in my shoes.
I have a hot feeling that hover cars are going to be a thing in 30 years.
In 30 years, I will have bought my family their dream houses for helping me when I was young.
Good morning. I'm Mirna Castrejon, President and CEO of the California Charter Schools Association, also known as CCSA. This week, the California Charter School community is gathered in Long Beach, the first time after 2 years for our annual Charter Schools Conference. It's a family reunion focused on our collective mission to provide more families with high-quality public education opportunities. This year, we also celebrate 30 years of the charter movement and look forward towards the next 30 years. I want to start by thanking the policymakers and educators that continue to ensure charter public schools remain pillars of their community across the Golden State. And to the millions of parents and students who are part of the charter family, thank you for being shining examples of California's public education system. Today, we are releasing a new statewide report, Charters at 30, Reimagining Public Education. Now, this study is part of an annual series produced by CCSA called Portrait of the Movement, or as we refer to it as the POM. So this year's POM is a progress report looking at how charters are meeting their mission at the 30-year mark of the charter movement. We encourage you to download our new report right now by going to our special Charters at 30 website, which is charters@30, the number 30.org. In 1992, California became the second state after Minnesota to authorize charter public schools with the passage of the California Charter Schools Act. The bill was authored by the late State Senator Gary K. Hart, a Democrat who represented the Santa Barbara region. Now, he believed that if educators were given more independence, they could create and sustain public schools that improved pupil learning. And charters were thus created, helping to put this new education model on the national map. In California, all charter schools are nonprofit, free, public, and open to all. Let me repeat that. In California, all public charter schools are nonprofit, free, public, and open to all. They are community schools that allow educators the flexibility to design instructional models to deliver a high-quality education and increase student outcomes. Today, we celebrate the fact that there are nearly 1,300 charter public schools across the Golden State, serving approximately 700,000 students. If we were a district, we'd be the largest one by far, almost double in the state. And according to the California Department of Education, charter public schools serve primarily low-income and Latino students. The past 2 years have been a watershed moment for public education in California and across the nation because the COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare the disparities that have long existed in public education and made them worse. Now, we cannot return to business as usual with an education system that was not supporting all California students, particularly students in disadvantaged areas and low-income communities. As we look ahead, we know that more students benefit from a public education system that is also evolving to meet their ever-changing needs. Charter public schools harness their autonomy and flexibility to adapt to rapidly changing and traumatic circumstances during the pandemic. That very same flexibility and autonomy can be leveraged to lead the way in strengthening public education with evidence-based practices. The report we are releasing today provides an analysis of how charter school educators are reimagining public education that is helping students succeed. The POM looks into key factors that will affect public education for the long haul, including examining the unique approach by charter public school educators to increase academic achievements, the evolving makeup of the charter student body, and how diverse charter school models offer families more education options that meet the unique needs of each child. The POM also offers recommendations for educators and policymakers to continue to build on the success found across the state. Please join me in welcoming Jenny Kress, who is the Managing Director of School Performance, Accountability, and Research at CCSA and is the lead author of our Charters at 30 Portrait of the Movement this year. Welcome, Jenny.
Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. So you're showing in the Portrait of the Movement report that charter public schools have been able to use what are pillars of the movement, right? This idea about autonomy and flexibility to reimagine public education. Tell us about what stood out in the research this year.
Yeah, this was really exciting research to work on, I have to say. I got to learn so much about so many different schools across the state. I think what really stood out was the sheer diversity of the charter school models that we saw. So we saw schools that teach aerospace to middle schoolers. We saw schools that do trilingual immersion, so Spanish, English, and coding.
Wow.
We saw schools that, personally, I found really inspiring that focus on sustainability and place-based education and hands-on learning to really look forward to the future. And then we also talked about in the report what we call these rising stars charters that are so impressive. They just have this off-the-charts growth with their students. And we wanted to zero in and learn a little bit more about them, and especially the fact that they're really closing achievement gaps for historically underserved students.
So tell me a little bit more about that closing of the achievement gap. What does autonomy and flexibility have to do with outcomes in closing achievement gaps?
Yeah, it really allows schools to tailor their programs to meet the needs of their unique students. So we know from our research this year that at 30 years, charter schools are majority low income, they're majority Latino, and independently run charter schools especially closely mirror the student populations seen at traditional public schools. And so schools with that sort of autonomy and flexibility are allowed to innovate and be creative and find new models that really meet the needs of their individual students.
So you looked at a wide range of schools that represent different areas of the state, different modalities, different approaches, different kinds of focus. What did you find out that really stood out? I mean, everybody likes to throw around the word innovation, but what does this really mean when you look at the case studies?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think two interviews really stood out. We spoke with Da Vinci Science, which is over in Hawthorne, and then Samueli Academy in Santa Ana. And we talked to them a lot about how they're redefining college and career readiness by sort of broadening what it means to be ready. So it doesn't just mean you know the standards, you have the test-taking skills. It means, are you financially prepared to plan for college? Do you understand what it's going to be like to live in a dorm with kids from across the country? Are you prepared to think about your career and match it to the major that you want and pick the classes that will really help you thrive in college, career, and life? And so those schools were really fascinating. They also are actually talking to alumni constantly and hearing from them, what could we have done better to prepare you to succeed in college, and then improving their programs based on that. So just those really specific examples were really interesting and really inspiring for me.
Now you mentioned alumni. At this point, at 30 years in the mark, I think I heard an estimate that we must have educated or graduated more than 1 million students. That's quite a story, quite a record in trajectories that perhaps could not have been foreseen by the original intent of the Charter Schools Act. What do you see in terms of what's promising for the future, if in fact we're going to pivot to a new normal? Which, tell me, as a researcher, what does the new normal look like? Is it going back? Is it going forward?
Yeah, I think we give some recommendations in the report for ways that we think that charter schools can really help lead the way to this reimagined future where public school education is prioritized and it really meets the needs of all students. And so we offer a recommendation around using multiple measures. So a school doesn't just educate students, they also prepare them to be good people.
Yes.
They monitor their progress along the course of the year. And so we want schools to be able to show that when they're up for renewal or when they're making big decisions about whether or not they should be able to stay open. And then we also recommend that we don't just sort of do away with state testing.
Right.
State testing is certainly flawed. It could be more culturally responsive. It could be improved. It could give you more real-time information, but it does provide valuable information, especially as we're recovering from the past few years and trying to ensure that our schools get equitable resources and that students have the funding and the instruction that they need to progress forward.
I really appreciate you raising that, because I know that there's somewhat of a debate out there. Certainly it's out in the conversation among parents and certainly educators as well, as we're thinking like we're coming out of this sort of data dark moment at a state level. We're trying to think about how best to help our students recover out of this hole. Your last report did a great job at really articulating what learning loss was really like and what schools were doing to really respond to the moment in very creative ways. And I agree with you that the issue of assessment, let's just call it assessment more broadly rather than just narrow testing or summative testing, it is a tool for equity. Like how I know that we can't know where we're going if we don't have a sense of where we are. Can you speak a little bit to that around the data you're collecting from schools, or what do you see in the horizon for how we could measure success and what does quality look like?
Sure, yeah, I think again, Samueli and Da Vinci offered some really interesting ways. They're looking, for example, at Samueli, they look at things like agency. Are students able to motivate themselves to learn? And so their grades aren't based solely on the knowledge. They're based, of course, partially on that, but they're looking at all these factors that lead students to be more resilient and progress in their learning and will hopefully help them persist through college and on in their futures. And so there's really creative and interesting ways, and I think as a researcher, we want all the information we can possibly get. So why get rid of something if it can provide a useful data point?
Yeah.
It's really just about what we do with the data, and that's, I think, where we're headed.
So from your researcher point of view, Jenny, if you had advice to give policymakers, what are the two things that they should be doing, that you'd like them to focus on, which can usher in this new age?
So again, speaking to this issue of multiple measures of school performance. So there's actually a law that allows charter schools this flexibility when they're making the case for why they should be able to stay open every 5 years, and that is actually going to go away in 2026 if policymakers don't act soon. And so one of the key recommendations is really that we continue to allow charter schools that flexibility to showcase all the work that's been happening, especially during the pandemic. And then second, I would say we could really learn from the rising stars that we call them in the report, but these are the schools that are dramatically accelerating growth for their historically underserved students. And so what are they doing right? What can they teach other charter public schools as well as traditional public schools about how to provide excellent opportunities and an excellent education for those students?
Well, that's wonderful. Well, I certainly hope that everybody has a chance to read your report. That's Charters at 30, the Portrait of the Movement report. Thank you so much, Jenny.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Joining us next is Alejandro Gomez. Alejandro is the founder and executive director of Bridges Preparatory Academy in Compton, California, a community that unfortunately continues to experience high rates of violent crime, which puts students at risk for experiencing complex childhood trauma. Now, we know that students who experience this sustained trauma tend to have lower educational outcomes and challenges, including high absenteeism rates. They're at risk for lower GPAs, impaired development of the brain and nervous system, of course, some complex behavioral issues, and unfortunately, increased involvement with the juvenile justice system and also long-term health problems. Acknowledging these challenges and being committed to working through them is a critical part of what Bridges Prep is all about, since they support their students through academics, but also through the emotional supports to help them overcome trauma. Alejandro, thank you so much for joining me.
Erna, thank you for having me here.
Our pleasure. Can you describe to me the work that your school does for your students to help bridge these gaps and deliver better outcomes?
I would be happy to. Well, Myrna, I just want to start off with just acknowledging that this year was a tough year
Yes.
to start any school. So for us, the first thing that we wanted to do was think outside the box. Opening in Compton just made me want to think, what is it that the Compton community needs? As we all know, every community is different. So here at Compton, I wanted to make sure that we were going to be able to support them educationally and emotionally. So what we are actually doing at Bridges Preparatory Academy that is thriving quite a bit, and every child is happy and willing to come to school every single day, is we have a school-wide emotional support system. What does that mean? We have full-time counselors on site that service our kids every single day. They drop everything that they have to do just to make sure that our kids are okay. At the beginning of the school day, we start with an SEL class for 30 minutes, and we also do restorative circles, which has helped the child just come out of their eggshell. Another thing that we actually do at Bridges Preparatory Academy is we hold every child accountable, but at the same time, we reassure them that we're going to be there with them at every step of the way that they have. We have rigor, which that's something that we can't let go of, regardless of what we're doing. So that's one thing that the kids actually know that we need to be doing. So for us, it's very important that they understand that we care about them, that we are there for them, and that we support them. It's my office is always an open door policy where they know they can come and talk to the principal. They know that they can always go talk to a counselor. They also have an advisory teacher that they know that they can also reach to. Sometimes we are those pillars that they don't have at home. I was fortunate enough to come from a big family of 8, but sometimes there's actually children that don't have that one person, that one adult that they can actually go home to and talk to. So we try to be that one person.
That totally makes sense. And so you acknowledge that there are challenges, and there are some challenges that are disproportionately impacting certain communities, but you don't see those as deficits. You still embrace this whole student with compassion, provide the supports and the human contact and connection that makes those obstacles acknowledged, invisible, but overcomable.
Yes, that's exactly what we do. Because we noticed that one big quote that I've always said, and I've always will resonate it, a child doesn't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. So how does being a charter school help you fulfill that mission?
I'm glad you asked. Being a charter school gives us that autonomy to be able to spend the funds and the right resources, to use the right tools. And once we see a problem that we need to address, we just modify it or adjust it. That's what makes us so different. That's what makes a charter so great, that we are able to adjust to the community. It's not us adjusting to the, it's not the students adjusting to us, it's us adjusting to them. So that gives us autonomy all around. And we noticed that, for example, Compton, where Bridges is currently located, we knew what was needed. Every child there, we did a survey, 100% of every single student have some type of ACE, traumatic deficiency. So we address it. So by us being an autonomous school, that has made a huge difference for us to be able to service those kids.
You know, Alejandro, we're just really beginning to understand what the short, mid, long-term impacts of the pandemic have been. I know that in certain areas of the state, it is not over by a long shot. Some of our schools, 30%, 40% of their students have lost an immediate caregiver in their family to this pandemic, and you don't bounce back from that. So, at least not in the short term, at least not with a lot of care and compassion in addressing those issues. So, I look forward to looking beyond the immediate into 5 years and see how that compassion and student-centeredness allows your students at Bridges to be able to overcome the challenges, because I think we haven't fully even seen the impacts yet.
No, we haven't. No, we haven't.
So what lessons can policymakers take from the approach that you've deployed at Bridges in what you've witnessed in your classrooms is making a difference?
What makes a difference at Bridges is showing the kids that we care. Right now, we just came back from a pandemic. This whole COVID has really hindered the education, the learning loss. They know that even though we expect a lot from them, they know we're there for support. For example, what makes us unique, we have a 90-minute every day that we focus with our kids. So I want the policymakers to know that it makes a difference when they know that they're being supported by the state.
That there's support, that there's resources, that there's a vision, and
Yes.
then there's keeping those promises to those students.
By all means.
Alejandro, thank you so much for joining us, for sharing the story of Bridges and the amazing work that you're doing for your students in Compton every day. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Myrna. Appreciate it.
With that, I would like to thank both Jenny and Alejandro for their insight and expertise. Again, I want to underscore the recommendations in the POM and call on policymakers, school administrators, and educators to join with the charter community as partners to make sure that we leverage the lessons we have learned over the past 30 years and we set a North Star for the next 30. This report only illustrates the important role that charter public schools play in the public education sector and how we can learn from each other to provide the best education opportunities to all California students. Again, you can find the report and lots of other important information about charter public schools and their role in shaping California's education landscape at our website, charters@30.org.